And welcome back to room 303 and freshman English. We are now on page 124, 125 and following. Your textbook in Unit 1, and you'll see this throughout actually the first three units, like to pair together texts. You've seen this already several times. We actually now will have two titles paired together. The first one, that's the one we're doing now, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And then the second text, Uncle Marcos. Now right away at 2B, we want to point out for the literary analysis rhetoric part of our study that we're going to now focus on character. Let's pause for a moment and take some quick notes. You'll remember that we said plot is the map of the story, and the beginning of that understanding of plot is what we call exposition, the introduction of several things. Time, when does the story, in terms of time, place, setting, all of those kinds of concerns. One of the concerns that we're going to meet always is this thing of character, okay? In other words, the individual in the story who is going to be for us having some kind of development or not developed. Let's read together on page 125, literary analysis character. A character, let's get it in our notes, a person or animal who takes part in the action of the literary work. You can learn about a character through the character's words and actions, the character's narration, what others say about the character. And then, important for your notes, we have round characters. Write it down. They are complex, showing many different qualities, revealing faults as well as virtues. In contrast, you have flat characters, one-dimensional, showing a single trait. Likewise, we can have a dynamic character, develops, changes, learns something during the course of a story or a text. A static character who basically remains the same. Finally, to finish, the main character of a story tends to be a round character and usually is a dynamic one. The main character's development and growth are often central to a story's plot and theme. As you read, consider the traits that make characters seem round or flat, dynamic or static. Now, we're going to ask this question at the end of both of these readings, both Secret Life of Walter Mitty and Uncle Marcos. Who for you are the round characters? Who are for you the static characters, the flat characters? Who are for you the dynamic characters, and who are for you the static characters? Normally, the way we think about it is that round characters and flat characters are kind of our designation of what characters are. Dynamic characters and static characters are more about how they behave in the story, how they either evolve or do not evolve. The other topic here is the author's purpose under reading skill on page 125. What is going on in regards to these two texts? What does the author want us to appreciate or understand about the main character? Sometimes we'll call him the protagonist of the text. Okay, I'm with you on page 126. Our leading question again is, can truth change? Your vocabulary words are provided for you there. Make sure you study those and take a look at those, all right? Let's meet James Thurber, the writer of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. This may be one of the most famous stories that we study in our freshman year. On page 127, there is dates 1894 to 1961. Let's read a little about Thurber. Thurber was a rare writer who expressed his comic genius in both words and pictures, wrote stories, plays, essays, poems, also a great cartoonist. Born in Ohio, joined the staff of the New Yorker magazine. I would write that down, that's huge. If you don't know about the New Yorker magazine, you need to Google, look it up. Great cartoons, great kind of comics in that magazine, along with some other kinds of things like stories and stuff. As a writer in the New Yorker, he goes in 1927. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty was published in that magazine in 1939, becoming an instant success. Many of Thurber's stories and sketches grew directly out of his own life. As he put it, quote, humor is a kind of emotional chaos told about calmly and quietly in retrospect, end quote. Thurber's characters try to stand up to the surprises of the modern world. Whether they succeed or fail, they always strike readers as authentic and very funny. And then one other comment, Thurber offered a Hollywood producer $10,000 cash not to make a movie about Walter Mitty. The movie was made anyway in 1947, and a new version came out in 2009. And I definitely recommend that you would take a look at these film versions of this text. Background for the story. Psychologists say, I hope you're reading with me on page 127, Psychologists say that a person's thoughts are often a series of seemingly unconnected reflections. An event in the real world can prompt unpredictable mental responses such as memories, snippets of songs, daydreams. In Thurber's story, random events cause Walter Mitty's thoughts to jump back and forth between his exciting secret life and his humdrum everyday existence. Now let me help you out here. This story can be a difficult story to read if you don't understand one thing that's about to happen. We have actually two existences, so write this down. We have the existence of Walter Mitty when he's just in the real world, quote unquote, the real world. That existence for him is going to be kind of painfully boring. Then we're going to have a second existence, and the second existence is anything but boring. Now, one of the reasons why we're going to have this idea about character is this question. Is Walter Mitty a round character or a flat character? Is he a dynamic character or is he a static character? And there's a lot of different answers to this question. We're going to try and decide how we think about this, all right? Let's go ahead now. We'll have our reader read with us. Again, we're following along just like we always do. Try to conquer monkey mind. Try to actually enjoy reading this text and not just hearing it read for you. And I hope that you enjoy this text as most readers have, all right? So here we go. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Let's follow along.
The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. We're going through! The commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. He wore his full-dress uniform with the heavily braided white cap pulled down rakishly over one cold gray eye. We can't make it, sir. It's spoiling for a hurricane, if you ask me. I'm not asking you, Lieutenant Berg, said the commander. Throw on the power light. River up to 8,500. We're going through! The pounding of the cylinders increased to pocket-a-pocket-a-pocket-a-pocket-a-pocket. The commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. He walked over and twisted a row of complicated dials. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, he shouted. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, repeated Lieutenant Berg. Full strength and number 3 turret, shouted the commander. Full strength and number 3 turret! The crew, bending to their various tasks in the huge, hurtling 8-engined Navy hydroplane, looked at each other and grinned. The old man will get us through, they said to one another. The old man ain't afraid of hell. Not so fast. You're driving too fast, said Mrs. Mitty. What are you driving so fast for? Said Walter Mitty. He looked at his wife in the seat beside him with shocked astonishment. She seemed grossly unfamiliar, like a strange woman who had yelled at him in a crowd. You were up to 55, she said. You know I don't like to go more than 40. You were up to 55. Walter Mitty drove on toward Waterbury in silence, the roaring of the SN-202 through the worst storm in 20 years of Navy flying fading in the remote, intimate airways of his mind. You're tensed up again, said Mrs. Mitty. It's one of your days. I wish you'd let Dr. Renshaw look you over. Walter Mitty stopped the car in front of the building where his wife went to have her hair done. Remember to get those overshoes while I'm having my hair done, she said. I don't need overshoes, said Mitty. She put her mirror back into her bag. We've been all through that, she said, getting out of the car. You're not a young man any longer. He raced the engine a little. Why don't you wear your gloves? Have you lost your gloves? Walter Mitty reached in a pocket and brought out the gloves. He put them on, but after she had turned and gone into the building and he had driven onto a red light, he took them off again. Pick it up, brother, snapped a cop as the light changed, and Mitty hastily pulled on his gloves and lurched ahead. He drove around the streets aimlessly for a time, and then he drove past the hospital on his way to the parking lot. It's the millionaire banker, Wellington Macmillan, said the pretty nurse. Yes, said Walter Mitty, removing his gloves slowly. Who has the case? Dr. Renshaw and Dr. Benbow, but there are 2 specialists here, Dr. Remington from New York and Mr. Pritchard Mitford from London. He flew over. A door opened down a long, cool corridor, and Dr. Renshaw came out. He looked distraught and haggard. Hello, Mitty, he said. We're having the devil's own time with Macmillan, the millionaire banker and close personal friend of Roosevelt. Obstruosis of the ductal tract. Tertiary. I wish you'd take a look at him. Glad to, said Mitty. In the operating room, there were whispered introductions. Dr. Remington, Dr. Mitty, Mr. Pritchard Mitford, Dr. Mitty. "I've read your book on streptothrombosis," said Richard Mitford, shaking hands. "A brilliant performance, sir." "Thank you," said Walter Mitty. "Didn't know you were in the States, Mitty," grumbled Remington. "Coles to Newcastle, bringing Mitford and me up here for a tertiary." "You are very kind," said Mitty. A huge, complicated machine connected to the operating table with many tubes and wires began at this moment to go pocketa, pocketa, pocketa. "The new anesthetizer is giving way," shouted an intern. "There is no one in the East who knows how to fix it." "Quiet, man," said Mitty, in a low, cool voice. He sprang to the machine, which was now going pocketa, pocketa, queep, pocketa, queep. He began fingering delicately a row of glistening dials. "Give me a fountain pen," he snapped. Someone handed him a fountain pen. He pulled a faulty piston out of the machine and inserted the pen in its place. "That will hold for 10 minutes," he said. "Get on with the operation." A nurse hurried over and whispered to Renshaw, and Mitty saw the man turn pale. "Coreopsis has set in," said Renshaw nervously. "If you would take over, Mitty?" Mitty looked at him and at the craven figure of Benbow, who drank, and at the grave, uncertain faces of the two great specialists. "If you wish," he said. They slipped a white gown on him. He adjusted a mask and drew on thin gloves. Nurses handed him shining... "Back it up, Mac! Look out for that Buick!" Walter Mitty jammed on the brakes. "Wrong lane, Mac," said the parking lot attendant, looking at Mitty closely. "Gee, yeah," muttered Mitty. He began cautiously to back out of the lane marked exit only. "Leave her sit there," said the attendant. "I'll put her away." Mitty got out of the car. "Hey, better leave the key." "Oh," said Mitty, handing the man the ignition key. The attendant vaulted into the car, backed it up with insolent skill, and put it where it belonged. "They're so cocky," thought Walter Mitty, walking along Main Street. "They think they know everything." Once he had tried to take his chains off outside New Milford, and he had got them wound around the axles. A man had had to come out in a wrecking car and unwind them, a young grinning garage man. Since then, Mrs. Mitty always made him drive to a garage to have the chains taken off. The next time, he thought, "I'll wear my right arm in a sling. They won't grin at me then. I'll have my right arm in a sling and they'll see I couldn't possibly take the chains off myself." He kicked at the slush on the sidewalk. Overshoes," he said to himself, and he began looking for a shoe store. When he came out into the street again with the overshoes in a box under his arm, Walter Mitty began to wonder what the other thing was his wife had told him to get. She had told him twice before they set out from their house for Waterbury. In a way, he hated these weekly trips to town. He was always getting something wrong. Kleenex, he thought. Squibs, razor blades? No. Toothpaste, bicarbonate, carborundum, initiative, and referendum. He gave it up. But she would remember it. "Where's the what's-his-name?" she would ask. "Don't tell me you forgot the what's-his-name." A newsboy went by shouting something about the Waterbury trial. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." The district attorney suddenly thrust a heavy automatic at the quiet figure on the witness stand. "Have you ever seen this before?" Walter Mitty took the gun and examined it expertly. "This is my Webley Vickers 5080, he said calmly. An excited buzz ran around the courtroom. The judge rapped for order. "You are a crack shot with any sort of firearms, I believe?" said the district attorney insinuatingly. "Objection," shouted Mitty's attorney. "We have shown that the defendant could not have fired the shot. We have shown that he wore his right arm in a sling on the night of the 14th of July. Walter Mitty raised his hand briefly, and the bickering attorneys were stilled. "With any known make of gun," he said evenly, "I could have killed Gregory Fitzhurst at 300 feet with my left hand." Pandemonium broke loose in the courtroom. A woman's scream rose above the bedlam, and suddenly a lovely dark-haired girl was in Walter Mitty's arms. The district attorney struck at her savagely. Without rising from his chair, Mitty let the man have it on the point of the chin. "You miserable cur!" "Puppy Biscuits," said Walter Mitty. He stopped walking, and the buildings of Waterbury rose up out of the misty courtroom and surrounded him again. A woman who was passing laughed. "He said Puppy Biscuit," she said to her companion. "That man said Puppy Biscuit to himself." Walter Mitty hurried on. He went into an A&P, Not the first one he came to, but a smaller one farther up the street. "I want some biscuit for small young dogs," he said to the clerk. "Any special brand, sir?" The greatest pistol shot in the world thought a moment. "It says Puppies Bark for it on the box," said Walter Mitty. His wife would be through at the hairdresser's in 15 minutes, Mitty saw in looking at his watch, unless they had trouble drying it. Sometimes they had trouble drying it. She didn't like to get to the hotel first. She would want him to be there, waiting for her as usual. He found a big leather chair in the lobby, facing a window, and he put the Overshoes and the puppy biscuit on the floor beside it. He picked up an old copy of Liberty and sank down into the chair. "Can Germany conquer the world through the air?" Walter Mitty looked at the pictures of bombing planes and of ruined streets. "The cannonading has got the wind up in young Raleigh, sir," said the sergeant. Captain Mitty looked up at him through tousled hair. "Get him to bed," he said wearily, "with the others. I'll fly alone." "But you can't, sir," said the sergeant anxiously. "It takes 2 men to handle that bomber, and the Archies are pounding hell out of the air. Von Richtman's circus is between here and Soyer." "Somebody's got to get that ammunition dumped," said Mitty. "I'm going over." "Spot of brandy?" He poured a drink for the sergeant and one for himself. War thundered and whined around the dugout and battered at the door. There was a rending of wood and splinters flew through the room. "A bit of a near thing," said Captain Mitty carelessly. "The box barrage is closing in," said the sergeant. "We only live once, Sergeant," said Mitty, with his faint, fleeting smile. "Or do we?" He poured another brandy and tossed it off. "I never see a man could hold his brandy like you, sir," said the sergeant. "Begging your pardon, sir." Captain Mitty stood up and strapped on his huge Webley Vickers automatic. "It's 40 kilometers through hell, sir," said the sergeant. Mitty finished one last brandy. "After all," he said softly, "what isn't?" The pounding of the cannon increased. There was the rat-tat-tatting of machine guns, and from somewhere came the menacing puckata of the new flamethrowers. Walter Mitty walked to the door of the dugout, humming Auprès de ma blonde. He turned and waved to the sergeant. "Cheerio," he said. Something struck his shoulder. "I've been looking all over this hotel for you," said Mrs. Mitty. "Why do you have to hide in this old chair? How did you expect me to find you?" "Things close in," said Walter Mitty vaguely. "What?" Mrs. Mitty said. "Did you get the, what's its name, the puppy biscuit? What's in that box?" "Overshoes," said Mitty. "Couldn't you have put them out in the store?" "I was thinking," said Walter Mitty. "Does it ever occur to you that I am sometimes thinking?" She looked at him. "I'm going to take your temperature when I get you home," she said. They went out through the revolving doors that made a faintly derisive whistling sound when you pushed them. It was 2 blocks to the parking lot. At the drugstore on the corner, she said, "Wait here for me. I forgot something. I won't be a minute." She was more than a minute. Walter Mitty lighted a cigarette. It began to rain with sleet in it. He stood up against the wall of the drugstore, smoking. He put his shoulders back and his heels together. "To hell with the handkerchief," said Walter Mitty scornfully. He took one last drag on his cigarette and snapped it away. Then, with that faint, fleeting smile playing about his lips, he faced the firing squad, erect and motionless, proud and disdainful, Walter Mitty, the undefeated, inscrutable to the last.
Now, there's so much about this story that lends itself to discussion, so let's now turn to it. I want to begin with the title. And that word in the title, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Jot down what you think is going on at 2B with that word secret. And what is it that is so secret in this text? Of course, we have 5 different moments when Walter Mitty steps out of his life into some other kind of life. Yes? About each of these, we're going to list them, obviously, but about each of these, we're going to ask something significant at level 1. Like, what's going on at level 2A? We're going to ask, what's going on with each one of these significant moments? The place I'm going to go, though, to begin our conversation is on page 133. Go there with me really quickly. In the middle of a conversation in that second life, that secret life, in episode number 4, as Mitty as war pilot, he says it this way: "We only live once, Sergeant," said Mitty with his faint, fleeting smile. "Or do we?" I think this is a significant moment in the text because I think it raises a question about what it means to be alive, what it means to be a thinking person. First of all, let's go to characterization really quickly. Notice we have two characters. Fundamentally, we have two characters in this text. We have Walter and we have his wife, right? Decide in your notes, what's the relationship between the two? What's Walter's wife like, right? She's the one that comes in, and she's the one that's always trying to snap him back. Walter is, of course, a guy that's going to daydream, right? And he's going to be out there in that other world doing this other stuff. This is why this story is so significant in its discussion of characterization. Because notice in our story, Walter Mitty can be understood as a very flat character if we're just looking at him in normal life. But when you put Walter Mitty in that other kind of life, then all of a sudden he becomes this fascinating kind of character. Let's take a look now at the story itself and analyze these different secret lives. Let's ask about each one of them as we go through. Notice the genius opening lines of the story, right? You immediately think you're in some kind of an adventure, war experience, the Navy boat and all of that kind of thing, right? Only to discover, no, he's sitting there in a vehicle with his wife, and she, of course, is giving him all kinds of, problems about the way that he's the way that he's driving, and you're driving too fast, Notice she says it on page 120.